The most advanced battleship in the Royal Navy lasted less than a year. Less than a year from the day it was commissioned to the day it hit the bottom of the South China Sea. In those few months, it did more than most warships do in a decade. It fought the Bismarck and survived. It carried Winston Churchill across the Atlantic to agree the declaration that would shape the entire post-war world. It was the pride of the fleet, and on a Tuesday afternoon in December 1941, 85 Japanese bombers turned it into a grave in less than 2 hours. 327 men went down with it. But here is the part that should disturb you. The most shocking thing about this ship is not how it was lost, it is what is happening to it right now. Somebody is tearing it apart. According to multiple reports, remains of its crew may have been pulled from the water alongside the scrap metal. The country that owns it cannot stop them. HMS Prince of Wales is officially off limits. It is not safe. When I started looking into this, I expected a story about a shipwreck. What I actually found was something much closer to a crime scene. And the crime is still happening. To understand why the wreck of the Prince of Wales matters so much, and why its destruction has caused outrage from the British Parliament to the Pentagon, you first need to understand what this ship actually was, and why it was sent to the other side of the world in the middle of a war it was winning. HMS Prince of Wales was a King George V class battleship, the most modern class of capital ship the Royal Navy possessed at the start of the Second World War. She was built at Camel Laird Shipyard in Birkenhead, laid down in January 1937, launched in May 1939, and initially commissioned on January 19, 1941, with a reduced complement, though she was not placed in full commission until March 31st, after completing sea trials. Nearly 37,000 tons as built, over 43,000 fully loaded. 10 14-inch guns in one twin and 2 quadruple turrets. The latest radar, the heaviest armour Britain could give her. She was supposed to be the future of the Royal Navy, and like so many ships in this war, she was rushed into service before she was finished. When Prince of Wales sailed into her first battle, civilian shipyard workers were still on board, still fitting equipment. Her gun turrets had not been fully tested. The main armament suffered repeated mechanical failures. None of that mattered when the order came. In May 1941, the German battleship Bismarck broke out into the North Atlantic. If she reached the open shipping lanes, she could cut Britain's lifeline. The Admiralty sent everything it had to stop her. HMS Hood, the largest warship in the Royal Navy and the pride of the fleet for 20 years, was dispatched alongside Prince of Wales to intercept. They found Bismarck in the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland on the morning of May the 24th. The engagement lasted minutes. At 06:01, a shell from Bismarck penetrated Hood's deck, reached her aft magazines and detonated. HMS Hood exploded and broke in half. She sank in under 3 minutes. Out of a crew of over 1,400 men, 3 survived. 3 men from a ship of 1,400. Prince of Wales was now alone against Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen. Both German ships turned their full firepower on her. A 15-inch shell hit the compass platform and killed nearly everyone standing around Captain John Leach. Leach himself was untouched. Fragments of the shell and of the men around him covered the bridge. The ship was hit 7 times. Her gun turrets were malfunctioning, jamming repeatedly from defects that had never been fixed because she had never been properly finished. She was outgunned, alone, and fighting with half her armament working, and she kept firing. Prince of Wales scored 3 hits on Bismarck. One of those hits struck below the waterline, ruptured Bismarck's fuel tanks, and contaminated her forward fuel supply with seawater. That single hit forced the German admiral to abandon the Atlantic raid and turn for port, a decision that ultimately led to Bismarck's destruction 3 days later. Prince of Wales limped away from that fight, damaged, bloodied, but alive. The ship that survived Bismarck. Remember that. It matters later. 3 months later, in August 1941, Prince of Wales carried Winston Churchill across the Atlantic to Placentia Bay, Newfoundland, for a secret meeting with President Franklin Roosevelt. The conference took place from August the 9th to the 12th, split between the deck of Prince of Wales and the American cruiser USS Augusta. The result was the Atlantic Charter, the joint declaration that laid the foundation for the United Nations, for NATO, for the entire post-war international order. The Atlantic Charter was agreed aboard HMS Prince of Wales. This was not just a warship. By the end of the summer of 1941, it was one of the most historically significant vessels afloat, and then somebody decided to send it to Singapore. By late 1941, Japan was preparing to invade Malaya and seize Britain's most important naval base in the Far East. The Admiralty decided that a show of force might deter the Japanese. The plan was to send a powerful naval squadron, designated Force Z, to Singapore. The centrepiece would be HMS Prince of Wales, accompanied by the First World War-era battlecruiser HMS Repulse and 4 destroyers. There was supposed to be an aircraft carrier. HMS Indomitable had been assigned to Force Z specifically to provide fighter cover. She never arrived. While working up off Jamaica, Indomitable ran aground in Kingston Harbour. She spent 12 days in dry dock in Norfolk, Virginia, and missed the deployment entirely. No replacement carrier was sent. Force Z sailed without air cover. This single fact would determine everything that followed. Admiral Sir Tom Phillips took command. Phillips was an old-school surface warfare officer who believed that modern battleships, with their speed, armour and anti-aircraft guns, could operate without carrier-based fighter protection. That belief was about to be tested in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Force Z arrived in Singapore on December 2nd, 1941. On December 7th, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Within hours, Japanese forces began landing on the coast of Malaya. Phillips sailed north with Force Z to intercept the invasion fleet. He was informed that air reconnaissance had been arranged, but coordination with the RAF in Singapore was poor. Phillips maintained radio silence throughout the voyage, which meant that when he changed course during the night, shore-based command could not track his movements. A critical disconnect had opened between Force Z and the air cover it would desperately need. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft located Force Z. Phillips did not know he had been spotted. Everything I've told you so far is the history that most people know. What happened on the morning of December the 10th is where this story becomes difficult to listen to. And what happened to the wreck decades later is what turns it into something else entirely. At 11:13 on the morning of December the 10th, 1941, the first wave of Japanese bombers appeared. High-level bombers attacked Repulse first. 1 bomb hit. Repulse survived. At 11:40, the torpedo bombers arrived. 85 aircraft in total. 49 torpedoes launched across the entire engagement. The very first torpedo to strike Prince of Wales was the one that killed her. It hit the port side aft, behind Y turret. The impact wrecked the outer propeller shaft on that side and tore open bulkheads along the entire length of the shaft tunnel, all the way into B engine room. The electrical system in the entire aft section of the ship was destroyed instantly. The ship began listing immediately. Without power, the pumps could not run. Without pumps, the flooding could not be stopped. In the first minutes of the attack, Prince of Wales was already dying. Repulse fought brilliantly. Captain William Tennant threw the old battlecruiser through turn after turn, combing torpedo wakes, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to avoid, but the numbers were overwhelming. At 12:33, after taking 4 torpedo hits, Repulse rolled over and sank. 513 of her crew were lost. Prince of Wales was now alone, crippled and listing heavily to port. 3 more torpedoes struck her in a coordinated follow-up attack that came from multiple directions simultaneously. The damage control parties worked in darkness because the electrical failure had killed the lights in entire sections of the ship. Men were fighting flooding, knee-deep in water they could not see, in compartments they could not pump, on a deck that was tilting further with every minute. Then, a 500-kilogram bomb penetrated the catapult deck and exploded on the main deck below, directly inside the cinema flat. The cinema flat had been converted into a makeshift casualty station. The wounded from the earlier torpedo hits were being treated there when the bomb came through the ceiling. The men who had survived the torpedoes were killed by the bomb meant for the ship. It was the most terrible moment in an attack that was already a catastrophe. The destroyer HMS Express came alongside to evacuate survivors. As Prince of Wales began to roll, her bilge keel scraped down the side of Express, nearly dragging the destroyer under with her. At 1:18 in the afternoon, HMS Prince of Wales capsized to port, hung in the water upside down for a long, terrible moment, and then sank stern first. 327 men from Prince of Wales were lost. Admiral Phillips went down with the ship. Captain Leach, the man who had survived the Bismarck, went down with the ship. That night, when Churchill received the news, he later wrote that in the entire war, he never received a more direct shot. There were now no British or American capital ships anywhere in the Pacific or Indian Ocean. Japan was supreme across that entire expanse of water. Prince of Wales and Repulse were the first capital ships in history to be sunk solely by air power while underway at sea and actively defending themselves. The aircraft were land-based, not carrier-launched, which made the lesson even more brutal. Ships did not even need to be near an enemy carrier to be destroyed from the air. The age of the battleship ended that afternoon in the South China Sea. The wreck of HMS Prince of Wales lies upside down in roughly 68 metres of water, approximately 50 to 70 miles off the coast of Kuantan, Malaysia, depending on which source you use. HMS Repulse lies a few miles away. In 2001, the British government designated both wrecks as protected places under the Protection of Military Remains Act of 1986. The ship's bell was raised in 2002 with Ministry of Defence permission, restored and placed on display. A white ensign on a buoy tied to one of the propeller shafts is periodically renewed. Every Royal Navy ship that passes the site holds a remembrance ceremony. For 60 years, the Prince of Wales lay undisturbed. The men inside were at rest. Then somebody came with explosives. In 2014, reports emerged that scrap metal dealers were using industrial explosives to blow apart both wrecks. The damage was extensive and targeted. Salvagers were cutting into the engine rooms, stripping out copper, brass, aluminium and non-ferrous metals. The operation was not small scale, it was industrial. To understand why anyone would go to this trouble for an 80-year-old shipwreck, you need to understand one thing about steel. Every piece of steel manufactured anywhere on Earth after 1945 contains trace amounts of background radiation from nuclear weapons testing. The atmospheric tests contaminated the global steel supply permanently. Steel produced before 1945 does not have this contamination. This pre-atomic steel, sometimes called low background steel, is extraordinarily valuable. It is used in medical imaging equipment, Geiger counters, space sensors, and scientific instruments where even trace radiation interferes with measurements. And the largest concentrated deposits of pre-atomic steel on Earth are sitting on the ocean floor in the form of sunken warships. This is not casual scavenging. This is a global black market driven by material science, and the wrecks of Force Z are prime targets. In May 2023, Malaysian authorities detained a Chinese-registered cargo ship called the Chuan Hong 68, anchored illegally over the wreck site. The ship had been tracked by satellite imagery operating over the wrecks as early as 2022, spending days at a time directly above the graves. When Malaysian authorities boarded the vessel, they found scrap steel, aluminium, brass fittings and Second World War ammunition. When police raided a linked scrapyard at Kota Tinggi in the state of Johor, they found something worse. The ship's two massive bower anchors had been ripped from the wreck and dumped in the yard alongside anti-aircraft cannon barrels, sections of hull plating and thousands of tons of historical metal torn from both ships. And among the metal, according to reports published by the US Naval Institute and other sources, were what appeared to be human remains, believed to be the bones of sailors who died on December 10th, 1941. The British Ministry of Defence has disputed this. In June 2025, the MOD stated it had not received any information to suggest human remains had been found. The discrepancy has never been resolved publicly. What is not disputed is that the anchors, the cannon barrels, and thousands of tons of material from a designated war grave ended up in a scrapyard. The Malaysian Armed Forces recovered the anchors and other material during the summer of 2023. The Chuan Hong 68 was released. It was detained again in July 2024 on further charges. It was released again. As of the latest reports, the vessel continues to operate. The law that is supposed to prevent this does not work. The Protection of Military Remains Act of 1986 only applies to British nationals on British-controlled vessels. It cannot be enforced against foreign nationals in international waters. Britain can assert sovereign immunity over the wreck, arguing that a Royal Navy warship remains Crown property wherever it lies. But sovereign immunity only works if the perpetrators can be caught, identified, and prosecuted in a foreign jurisdiction thousands of miles from home waters. And not every country recognises sovereign immunity claims. China is not one of them. The British government has repeatedly called these wrecks war graves, but under UK law, there is technically no legal category for a war grave at sea. The Protection of Military Remains Act creates the designation of a protected place, which sounds authoritative until you realise it carries almost no enforceable power outside British territorial waters. The designation is symbolic. It has no teeth. A Ministry of Defence survey conducted in March 2019 revealed gaping holes in both wrecks where the midships engineering spaces used to be. The salvagers had targeted the most lucrative components, the copper and brass machinery that once powered these ships. Repulse's entire stern section is now missing, cut away and removed piece by piece. Questions have been raised in the House of Lords multiple times, most recently in 2025, about whether anything will be left of either wreck within 20 years at the current rate of destruction. The Ministry of Defence's response has been to defer to Malaysian authorities. The investigation continues. The destruction also continues. And then there is the geopolitical dimension, though this part remains speculative. Both wrecks lie within waters that fall under China's 9-line territorial claim in the South China Sea. Some analysts and naval commentators have suggested that the systematic destruction of foreign military wrecks in these waters may serve a strategic purpose beyond scrap metal. The argument, which has not been proven, is that removing the physical evidence of other nations' historical naval presence from the seabed eliminates any basis for sovereign immunity claims. Whether or not that theory is correct, the practical reality is clear. The wrecks sit in a legal void where everyone agrees they should be protected, and nobody has the power or the will to actually protect them. HMS Prince of Wales fought Bismarck and survived. It carried Churchill across the Atlantic to shape the post-war world. It was sunk by Japanese aircraft off Malaya on December 10, 1941, with 327 men still inside. It was designated a protected war grave in 2001, and in 2023, somebody ripped its anchors from the seabed and left them in a scrapyard alongside its cannons and hull plating. The law says it is off limits. The men who wrote that law never imagined this. 2 ships, 2 graves, both protected, neither safe, and nobody is coming to fix it.